Hello, this is the Talk Shop. It's a great morning in Laramie, Wyoming, the Gem City of the Plains. Underway is the Candidate Awareness Tour 2024 edition, and we are here with Brett Glass, City Council Ward 2 candidate for the City of Laramie. And Brett, thank you for joining us in Studio 255.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Yeah, we have anybody interested in joining us, you can do so. We have several chairs in Studio 255 at the Laramie Plains Civic Center. This show segment brought to you by Martindale's Western Store in historic downtown Laramie and H&R Block. Marty Anderson, we appreciate your support. And the good folks at Laramie Range Ford, also supporters of this segment. This morning's interviews, we start out generally, who are you, Brett, and what do you want people to know about you and your candidacy for City Council?
Okay, well, let's start with the basics. My name is Brett Glass, and I've lived in Laramie now continuously for 32 years. I am an electrical engineer by training, and here in Laramie, almost back at the very beginning of the time I moved here full-time, I started the world's first wireless internet service provider. This is way before you could get even a DSL modem in your house or any kind of internet on your cell phone. And we did this to help Laramie get connected with the outside world, where previously you had to dial into something like CompuServe or AOL if you wanted to get to anything resembling the modern internet.
Where'd you learn that engineering?
I went to, my undergraduate work was done at Case Tech, which is a Rust Belt engineering school in Cleveland, Ohio. No matter, you can get an electrical engineering degree there, but no matter what engineering degree you get there, you have to learn how to build a bridge. That's how old school it was. And then I went to work for Texas Instruments for a few years, designing computer chips. And I designed networking chips for computer networking. And after I'd done that for a couple of years, I realized where the gaps in my education were, and I went back to get my master's degree in electrical engineering. And I did that at Stanford in California. Well, I lived there for a few years after I got the degree and did various things, contributed to various products, some of which people may remember from the Silicon Valley. But I decided I did not want to live there forever. I really missed the small town environment, and I remembered Laramie from when I'd been here in my youth, and flew out one day to see, well, is it like I remembered it? I knew I wanted to live in a college town, but I didn't want to live in Palo Alto, California. So I checked out Laramie, and it was every bit as good as I remembered it. So I moved back, and I've been living here ever since. Again, I've been running the wireless internet service provider. My family also owns some rental properties here, and we've been taking rundown buildings and fixing them up and making them into nice places to live. And in my spare time, I have a number of hobbies. I'm in keeping with my engineering background. I'm a ham radio operator, and I participate a lot in that. I'll be participating in the big field day that's going to be going on next month up at the summit, where we set up stations and try to contact the entire world. I'm a musician. I write and perform music, including original songs, and all sorts of various other things that I indulge in. And my wife is also she's a builder, and she went to LCCC and went to their construction technology course and learned how to do that. And also her hobby right now is raising birds. She's raising chickens. Literally backyard chickens here in Laramie, which is a lot of fun. And she's also started raising quail, which make these really cute little eggs that are very tasty.
They come in multiple colors? Quail eggs?
Quail eggs vary. There's some that have a bluish cast to them. Most of them kind of look like kind of camouflage.
Oh,
they're designed to be camouflaged from predators.
How unique. That's awesome.
And the quails are these cute little softball-sized birds. They're pretty friendly, and we take care of them, and they give us eggs, and it's a lot of fun.
Fantastic. What inspired you to run for city council?
Well,
this is not your first campaign. I should acknowledge you were part of the Candidate Awareness Tour in 2023. Took us up on our invitation to join us as we invite all candidates in every race to join us on the Talk Shop. You did so.
Yeah, so my motivations are the same as they were before. In the 2022 campaign, I competed against in the primary a whole bunch of candidates, and then in the general election against one particular candidate whose name is Brandon Newman. And it wasn't, when my campaign against Brandon was not an acrimonious campaign. We agreed on about 90% of the issues, and it really was just a matter of, okay, who is going to appeal to the public more. And Brandon did a much better job than me of advertising, getting his name out there, getting the word out there, and he won by a very narrow margin. He won by about 200 to 300 votes, which was less than the number of undervotes. There were more people in Laramie who were apathetic or didn't know who to vote for city council than there were who favored him over me. So I thought that was fine. I got my Tuesday nights back for a while, and Brandon is now sitting on council and doing a very good job. I now would like to join him there.
Fantastic. And where do you envision taking the city of Laramie? Where do you believe the city of Laramie needs to go?
Well, let's see. The first thing I think we need to do, and I think this is one of the most important things, is to have a real government for the size of city that we're growing to be. Laramie is not at 50,000 people yet, which is kind of when you light up on the map of cities that corporations want to set up businesses in. Big ones like, say, Target. Other large corporations that think about establishing a branch there. But we're getting there. Mm-hmm. And right now we have a very small town style of city government. We have what's called a council and city manager kind of government. That means that the city council, which I'm running for, is kind of a board of directors, but they're only there part-time. They only come in once or twice a week to approve things. The real manager of the city is the city manager. And that person is not elected, and originally the idea is that person will just take care of business, and there isn't that much business to do, so that person just gets the work done. Well, Laramie has grown, and that's no longer the case. Almost anything that goes on in the city, almost any issue, the public should have input into, and right now they don't. Right now the bureaucracy kind of runs itself, and again, we need to become a major league city. In order to do that, we need a major league form of government, which means electing our mayor and having the mayor be the CEO of the city. That's a major change that I would like to see happen, and one of the things I hope to do if I get on council. The other thing that we're finding is that because the council members are part-timers, many of them don't respond to you. You call or you email, and you just don't get an answer. And that's not acceptable, to have your city government not being responsive to the people. Another thing is the finances of our city aren't being run very well. Right now, there are quite a number of people in the city government who are probably being overpaid for what they do. The city manager, as brought out in a letter to the Boomerang by Paul Montoya a few weeks ago, makes more than the governor of the state. And that's a tremendous amount to pay someone who, again, is not directly accountable to the people.
How did that develop in your eyes? How did that develop? And I want to go back to the size of Laramie, because many in the community, I hear, Laramie's not growing, and the reason it's not growing is housing. Take
okay.
Whichever you like first. In those two questions.
Okay, well, Laramie is growing, and it's growing more slowly than maybe some people would like it to. But actually, I don't mind the fact that it is growing slowly, because, you may remember the Governor Hirschler long ago said that we want to have growth on our terms. And having slow, steady growth rather than a boom means that we can manage the growth and make sure that it happens right. But there are a number of things that, a number of areas where we need to grow, where we're not growing. We don't have a real good variety of retail, and so many people in town go to shop out of state. We're going to be getting for the first time, one of the major chain retailers will be getting a Ross in the Gateway Shopping Center. So for the first time, a lot of people will be able to shop for clothing in town, and that's a good thing.
They are one of the entry businesses to the formerly Kmart location.
That's the Gateway Plaza. That's exactly where it's going to be.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are excited about being able to shop there, but that is only one. And they actually had to give them a major tax break before they could incent them to come there. We need more of that. And again, we need to direct the growth, but we do need to grow because our population is steadily increasing. You know, we're most of Albany County, and Albany County now has between 40 and 50,000 people, and we're over 30,000. You know, we need to manage that growth properly, and well. The reason why we haven't been able to is, again, because I think the city government has stayed a small town type of city government and really hasn't been very responsive. One of the areas where it hasn't been very responsive is, in fact, housing. In the last couple of years, instead of doing things which would make housing more available and more affordable, the city council has gone the other way. They've actually, and this is because the staff has fed them things to pass, and they've rubber stamped them. They have been fed proposals which increase the cost of housing and decrease the supply of housing. For example, one thing the city council did just a couple of years ago is that they required every contractor to be stringently licensed, every building contractor, every repair contractor, every tradesman. And when they did that, a whole bunch of people dropped out of doing things, just even basic repairs on buildings.
Did that restrict homeowners from doing their own work on their own home?
Yes, it did. What it did was it said that only a licensed contractor could pull a permit to do any work that requires a building permit on your house. And a lot of things that you wouldn't think of require a permit. So suddenly you had a situation where you couldn't even do something with your own hands on your own property, and of course a lot of people have just quietly done that without telling the city. But that's not good either. You want to have a building inspector come over if you're doing something that's critical. You want to make sure it's done right. But it's very convenient for the staff if they only have to deal with the group of licensed contractors that they know, and so they pushed through this provision.
Has that led to favoritism? It sounds like something that would lead to favoritism, and I don't have witness to that, but I'm curious.
Well, what it's done is it's prevented contractors from coming over from other cities. Suppose you need your roof done. And you can't you call up roofing contractors and you discover that no, everybody in Laramie is booked up through the whole entire summer. You can't call over to Cheyenne and say, well, okay, you're a roofing contractor over in Cheyenne. Will you come over and do my roof for me, please? Or at least you couldn't do that. The situation has gotten so bad that people appealed to the legislature, and the state legislature has actually now passed a bill which hasn't gone into effect yet, which requires reciprocal licensing. That means that if a contractor is licensed in Cheyenne, they'll be able to work here. But council didn't think about that, and it's only the state legislature that came in and corrected that. So this is an example of council not really thinking ahead about the effects of what they're going to do. Mm-hmm. Other examples. The council also went ahead and passed a change to zoning, which they really thought was going to be a good thing, allowing what they call accessory dwelling units in pretty much every zoning district in the city. Now, ADUs sound like a good idea. You can put a cabin, if you have a big enough lot, you can put a cabin on your lot and rent that out, and that'll and that could possibly become, in theory, low-cost housing for a student or someone else who just needs a small place to live. But in reality, it doesn't make low-cost housing, because the person who built that expensive cabin and also went through the whole building permit process and everything else and, jumped through all the hoops is going to have spent a lot of money on that. They're not going to charge below market rent. And so it's not going to be a particularly affordable option.
All new pricing.
That's right. And what's more, it's going to increase the price of the property that it's built on. So now if you want to buy a house and there's an ADU in the yard, suddenly that's tens of thousands of dollars more that you're going to have to pay for that property. And so it doesn't improve affordability either. In fact, it kind of gets in the way. What's more, if you have an ADU on your property, you don't qualify for the property tax breaks that the state legislature passed during the session this year. So you actually wind up having to increase your rents more to cover the fact that you're paying higher property taxes than your neighbor who doesn't have the ADU. So council really didn't think that through. They didn't think through what would decrease the price of housing. Now, other things about rentals. A couple of years ago, the council also passed rental regulations, which very strictly regulated rental properties and required licensing of them. And yeah, we had a couple of really decrepit properties in town, and we had a couple of bad landlords in town, and that was their motivation for doing that. But the way they passed the regulations, it sort of backfired. First of all, about half of the people who owned rentals in Laramie never applied for the license, but just kind of went underground, kind of started renting on the QT because they didn't want the regulations. And so now only 50% or less of the rentals in town, and it's hard to estimate exactly how many there are, but roughly 50% are not licensed at all and have kind of dropped out of sight.
Was licensing necessary in your estimation?
I don't think it was. I don't think it does anything. And the reason why was the licensing didn't come with an inspection. The person who signed up for the license had to say, I'm following all the rules, but they didn't actually inspect. So the only way anyone ever found out if someplace was really run down was if the tenants complained. And a lot of the tenants just wanted the least expensive place they could get. Didn't want to complain because that might raise the price.
Did local registration expand Wyoming state statutes protecting renters and obligating landlords in state statute?
Yeah, there was a controversy about that. Right after those regulations were passed, a lawsuit was brought by a company that owns a bunch of rentals in town. And they claim that the regulations, which were copied, by the way, from completely out of state, they were copied from the cities of Eugene and Corvallis, Oregon. The lawsuit claimed that they violated state statute and the state constitution. But two things happened. First of all, the judge wasn't really sure that they did, and said, "Well, I think they might be allowed to do this." And what you do then, of course, is then you appeal. You go up to the higher courts. You go up to the Wyoming Supreme Court, and it makes the final ruling on what's constitutional or what's legal according to state law. But then that rental company ran out of money. The lawyers were very expensive. I personally don't think they did a very good job of making their case. And basically, that rental company didn't decide to pursue it, and so for now the regulations are in place and they haven't been overturned. My personal opinion is that they violate state law, that the state law takes precedence over them, and that it'd be a really good thing if they were overridden by the state law. And here's why. It's not. I really do believe that tenants should be protected. And I think it's very important for them to know what their rights are under the law. But those rights are actually very well established by the existing state law, and we can improve the state law. By doing that, we won't just protect the people who have to live inside the city limits of Laramie, but we'll protect people everywhere throughout the state. Right now, some of the most squalid rental properties that you will see in the Laramie area are just over the line outside in the county. And no matter what you did inside the city, they won't be affected. So it really makes sense to do this on the state level. The other reason why it makes sense to do it on the state level has to do with courts. Suppose you're a tenant and your landlord isn't maintaining things. There's black mold all over the place. It's uninhabitable. You can't really you can go to the city and say they're violating the regulations, but so far the city has just pocketed the licensing money and hasn't really done anything to enforce any of that. But under state law, you can go to the circuit court, you can go to the county courthouse, and you can file a civil suit that gets you your money back, that gets you released from your lease, that does all sorts of things that actually help you. And you can't do that at the city level. Most people don't know this, but city courts are only criminal courts. And things involving landlord-tenant disputes, and that includes anything about a dispute about what the lease means, or an eviction, those are civil matters, and so those can only be handled by the county court, and the county is part of the state. So it really makes sense to have one-stop shopping and do all of this on the county level. You still have local control. You haven't forfeited that because the county courthouse is still local. But you get the city out of doing that, And that's a good thing because the city government is already tremendously expanding and is already taking on more than it can handle. That's why it really hasn't done much to enforce its own rental regulations.
Has that contributed to a community sense of lack of notice or due process and public awareness for different topics? Recently, parking, downtown Laramie parking matter arose, and apparently it was a matter that, quote unquote, didn't have to be brought in front of the public for comment.
Yeah, well, let's talk about that. Well, first of all, what happened? A developer from out of town and out of state, a big private equity firm, came to Laramie and said, we would like to build a huge housing project, a monolith, 6 stories tall, and we're looking for a place to put it in Laramie. And what they focused on, what they proposed was to take over the downtown parking lot, which sits by the railroad tracks behind Coal Creek Coffee, between First and Second Streets, completely eliminate all of the parking there, and build a humongous 6-story building which would tower over everything else in downtown. It would be taller than the tallest buildings in downtown. And then they would go ahead and they claimed that some of the units in there would be affordable, but they didn't specify exactly what they would do. Their initial plans for the building showed that they would have 88 units or more. They might have as many as 90 units in there. It wasn't exactly clear. But they built a parking garage on the first floor of the building that was only for their tenants and only had about 60 spaces. So all of the people in those other units would be overflowing and trying to park elsewhere in downtown. And the parking lot that everybody relied upon if they worked downtown or if they stayed more than an hour to shop would be gone. So this would completely eliminate the ability to park downtown. You basically wouldn't be able to come downtown and patronize the businesses and find a place to park. You'd be circling for hours trying to find a place.
And the county standard, as I understand from city planning meetings that I've attended, is like 1.5 per residence parking, and 1.5 times 88 units is like 176 parking spaces or something like that.
Yep. And if you do the calculation, and I actually wrote the boomerang about this, we would suddenly have a deficit of more than 100 spaces compared to before. And this is not something that would be
plus
good.
The loss of
Yes.
value in an agreement that's actually active and renewable to 2042, year 2042.
Exactly. And here's the thing. In order to take over that parking lot and build what they're calling the Stencil monolith, because the name of the company is Stencil, they would have to get the city to give up its lease on that land. The city doesn't own that parking lot. It rents it. And there were 2 owners. And those 2 owners leased it to the city. It's a long-term lease. It goes for like 40 years. Now, the city doesn't have to give up that lease, and that lease greatly benefits the public. So the proposal came before city council. Well, what if we give up that lease and let this developer build here? And, well, it went straight from the city planning staff, which got the proposal from the developer, did not go to the Planning and Zoning Commission, which is what you'd expect. That would be the normal process. Instead, it went straight to council. And it went to council before the details of the building were even fleshed out, although we had the basic idea of what they were doing. And basically, before anything had come together about the whole project, they wanted them to give up the lease before they even knew the details of what was going on. And that was not proper process. They should have had better idea of what was being proposed. And it should have gone before the Planning and Zoning Commission, which makes recommendations, before it ever went directly to council. But instead, people in the community were blindsided by this. The proposal went to council and appeared on the agenda suddenly, without any warning, without any polling of the community. And there is an organization downtown which is called Laramie Main Street, which apparently the developer went over and got them to say that the council should approve this deal. But neither the developer nor this this organization, which is a private
Hold on a
organization.
second. The mission of Laramie Main Street, as I understand it from reading off their website, is to support economic development in historic downtown Laramie.
Yeah, but it's a private nonprofit that is not accountable to it's not directly obligated to satisfy anything but its own members.
The city of Laramie supports, actually 2 meetings ago, supported them with, I believe, more than $155,000 in monetary support for that organization's operation through
Yeah.
fees and dues.
And that is controversial because they are organized as what's called a 501c3 nonprofit. And a 501c3 nonprofit is a charity. It's not supposed to engage in activities that are normally carried on for profit. So it's not supposed to be what the city hired it to do, which is to be a PR agency. They're also not supposed to lobby. And lobbying includes supporting legislation or supporting actions by government. And yet here they had submitted a letter to the city council supporting the city government relinquishing that lease. And so this is very controversial. It's something that the IRS doesn't crack down on as they should. But there's a lot of controversy. The other thing was that Laramie Main Street didn't go out to a single local business and ask them what they thought. If it was going
Now,
to
wait a
support
minute.
them.
For a noise parade and noise permit,
Right?
you are required as a retail business or as an event. When I was serving on Laramie Jubilee Days committee, we had to actually visit or submit and extend the opportunity for people we had to provide notice, prove notice in a designated area, a perimeter of the space that we were going to close. And we had to have that was absolutely required by the city clerk.
That's right. And the
Sue,
city,
great Sue, long ago, but love Sue, but that was not an easy process, and that was for a noise parade permit.
that's a city ordinance which states that if you're going to close down the street for something like a block party or Jubilee Days, you were supposed to go to all of the residents in the area and let them know about it, and give them a chance to protest your plans or at least to weigh in on them. But unfortunately, the city manager's office doesn't enforce that ordinance the way they should. This year for Jubilee Days, they've already made their plans, and nobody got the required notice saying that was going to happen. There might have been a little. I'll have to check the Boomerang to see if they put a little tiny postage stamp sized ad in the Boomerang, but they didn't go directly to anybody to ask them to approve the plans.
Are things being bypassed in that sense because this is the 85th annual Laramie Jubilee Days? We've done it the way we've done it, and it's always been approved, so on and so forth. Is that a common sense excuse or rationale for that process being bypassed? In your opinion, in your view?
In my opinion, it never should be. I mean, unless the ordinance says that it's automatic, it shouldn't be automatic.
And if it's not necessary,
Yeah.
retract the ordinance, right?
Yeah. And the ordinance is also very unclear about how to do things. If you read it, it's actually, it kind of steps all over itself, and, one paragraph isn't consistent with the other paragraph. It's something that when council sees something like this, it should go in and correct it and make it clear and set the ground rules. But as it is, what happens with Jubilee Days is some people in downtown really like it because it brings them business, but others just kind of tolerate it and put up with it because it closes down the street in front of their business from noon on Thursday all the way through the cleanup, which doesn't happen until afternoon on Sunday. Some of the businesses are really impacted by that, and most of them just kind of grin and bear it because, well, it's Jubilee Days, and they want to be good neighbors. But there are, not everybody really likes it. They should be able to have input. For instance, they should be able not to have the beer tent set up right in front of their business if they don't want to.
Historically, always in the same place.
Well, they actually moved it, and it's funny. I was involved in that. They actually, the building which my family owns downtown, we own one building that's right in the middle of downtown, used to have the beer tent set up directly in front of it. And we had people wandering around with beers, spilling beer in the front entryway, wandering into the building looking for the bathroom. we managed to persuade Laramie Jubilee Days to at least move the tent a little bit away.
Right.
But we had to go, the city, again, the city manager's office was just rubber stamping the layout of Jubilee Days. We really had to fight just even to get that, even to get that to happen. And again,
As a property owner running for city council, how would you treat matters of conflict of interest, perhaps? What would you use as a standard to involve yourself in voting matters or recuse yourself, or how would you handle that as a matter of integrity?
Well, that's an interesting question, and it's come up a couple of times lately. We have a state legislator um, who recently has started lobbying for legislation that she's actually the executive director of Laramie Main Street, who has been lobbying for legislation that would directly benefit Laramie Main Street. Basically, it would help them renovate an old or demolish an old building that was donated to them. So the way I say it, we're a small community, and everything is interconnected. So it is hard for any member of council not to vote on something that does not affect them in some way. But it shouldn't affect them very directly in particular. And, where you draw that line, I think basically the city council should be able to get advice from an attorney as to whether that, whether it comes too close to what they're doing. Because a good example might be rental regulations. My family owns some rental properties, and we're personally affected by what the city does in terms of rental regulations. But so are several other members of city council. And so should more than half of city council not vote on what to do about rentals or what to do about housing? No. The rule should be that if it affects everybody generally and equally who's in a similar position, they should be allowed to vote on it. But if it's for the benefit of one specific person, that person really should recuse. That's the only way you can really do it in a small town.
So the rule of many versus a few.
Yeah, and that's the way it's done on the state level in the legislature too.
A lot of liquor store owners, a lot of liquor license owners in the legislature. Is that not correct? Amongst other property, realtors, real estate lawyers, and so forth.
Almost anything. When
Right.
you have a citizen...
All walks of life.
Yeah, when you have a citizen legislature, you're going to have citizens there who are involved in all sorts of businesses. And basically you have to draw the line and say, okay, if it's the whole state, it affects everybody equally. It affects their competitors as much as it affects them. Well, then it's fair to say that they should be able to vote on it. But if it affects them uniquely, no, that's where you cross the line.
We've talked about the who you are, what you stand for, where you'd like to see the city of Laramie go. We've talked and touched on.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Why you? Why now?
Well, having lived in the city longer than a lot of folks who live here now, I'd like to think that I have some perspective on things. I know how things used to be and what's gotten better and what's gotten worse. Because I run two businesses, really two and a half businesses, because I'm also doing consulting and a few other things here. I know what the challenges are in terms of running a business and also just managing to survive here. I interact with the city a lot more than a lot of people do. And so I can see where the problems are in interacting with the bureaucracy and what to do about that. And again, this is partially just self-interest. I want to live in a thriving city that is a great place to live. And so I want to make sure that the city goes in that direction. I don't want to see us strangled by bureaucracy. I don't want to see our opportunities for growth or to be an enjoyable place limited. And I want to make sure that things are fair, because I see a lot of things go on which I don't think are fair, and like to try to rectify that.
If you're just joining us, the Talk Shop is currently in a candidate awareness tour segment. This is an important public affairs program edition this year, as we have an election coming up. That primary date, August 20th. with the general election being November 5th. Now, important other date, July 23rd, absentee voting on or about will begin and be available to enjoy, I guess, that opportunity to vote absentee ballot. And if you are so inclined to do so, you want to make sure you contact the Albany County Clerk and make sure you got all the arrangements in order to do that vote, cast that vote just that way, in person or absentee. And Brett, do you have any recommendations? We're visiting with Brett Glass, City Council Ward 2 candidate for the City of Laramie. And this election, any other important issues that we haven't addressed that you prepared to speak on, perhaps briefly, if you would?
Well, let's see. We've talked about parking and housing, which are, well, actually, we probably haven't talked about every aspect of parking. We've talked about that one particular proposal which eliminated parking, but what we didn't talk about...
A lot of resolutions came out from 35 vocal, active people in Laramie speaking at one of the city council meetings that actually pretty much calmed and chilled the elimination of a parking lease agreement for the Landmark Square parking area.
Yes, and that's another reason why I'm running, because interestingly, after 35 people spoke against this development in downtown Laramie, and by the way, there is a possibility it will go on someplace else, that would be fine, but definitely people saw this as being bad for downtown. 35 people spoke against giving up the lease on that parking lot. Nobody spoke from the public in favor of giving up the lease.
Save Stencil, the contractor, who
nobody from the general public.
Right.
And yet, 3 city council members voted to give up the lease. 2 of them are my opponents in this race. And that's one of the reasons why I decided to register as a candidate again. Because council sometimes just doesn't listen to the public, even when 35 people right there, right in front of them, in their face, are telling them, no, don't do this. Some of them don't listen.
It was stated that 400 unique letters were received by one city council member. I presume all of them received those, but perhaps only that one received 400. But that's a massive participation. I don't know what their usual activity is of involvement from the community in any agenda item, but that seems very strong. I wouldn't see a representative having a difficult time knowing where their constituents wanted them to be.
That's very true. But city council tends to be, and this is another thing which we see happen, it tends to be kind of a burnout job. A lot of people join the council and they're very eager at first to do particular things and accomplish things and serve the public. But over time, they're not really being paid very much for their time. And, there's a lot of them actually are professionals. They're still active and they realize that, they're barely being paid enough to get by. This is a reason why I was not opposed, by the way, to the increase in pay for their attending meetings, because we want to pay them. If we pay them a little more, we can hold their feet to the fire and say, read your packet, investigate these issues. Don't just rubber stamp what's brought before you. And so that's one of the reasons why I run for council. I am not want to run for council. I'm not the kind of person who is going to burn out on this. I am going to read the packet every week. I'm going to return emails. I'm going to return phone calls. And I'm going to care about what people think.
Councilman Newman mentioned in a previous candidate awareness tour interview that packets hadn't been received. I actually witnessed his statement on 2 votes where he voted no, and he stated the reason for his vote no was not that he didn't support the organization, the entity. I think one was the airport and another was perhaps Laramie Main Street Alliance, but the effect was he hadn't received in a timely fashion from city staff a packet.
Yes, well, the information doesn't get out to the public or the members of the council in a timely way. And this is another thing about the workings of council that really ought to be changed. Right now, when city council is going to have a meeting, the previous Friday afternoon, after the news cycle for the day has already finished, an email goes out that says, look at the agenda, we finally put it online. And so we have only the weekend and then 1 weekday before the day of the meeting. That's not enough time for the public to really digest what's going on and get people together to comment on an item. It's also, again, not timely for the press to report on it because most of the time the press is going to be working during the week. Same thing with the council members. They need time to digest things. Now, the agenda for a city council meeting is not a document that can't be prepared farther in advance. And I've mentioned to council many times before, I think it should be at least the previous Wednesday. So at least we have a couple of work days before the weekend to digest what's going on in there. But so far that hasn't been done.
How do you feel about consent agenda items?
I think that about maybe 20% of the items on the consent agenda should be pulled off it. Now, for those out there who don't know what the consent agenda is, when city council meets, there are a whole lot of items that they've already sort of considered or which aren't very controversial. So they lump them together to streamline the meeting. They lump them together into one item, which they call the consent agenda, and everybody just votes on them in bulk, one vote to approve or not approve everything. And it is possible for any city council member to ask that an item that turns out to be controversial to be pulled from the consent agenda and put back on the main agenda where there's going to be a separate vote and a separate discussion of it. But you really have to work to get city council members to pull it because it extends the meeting. It means more discussion.
If you're new to a meeting, it's also difficult to ascertain exactly what is this item that's on the consent item. They'll list it, but it's very limited in information. It doesn't indicate more than a title in many cases what that consent agenda item is.
Sometimes there's an attachment which you can click on in the agenda which gives you the details. But you're right, a lot of it's buried. So the consent agenda should really be reserved for routine things, such as approving the minutes of the previous meeting. That's very rarely controversial. Paying bills. When the city pays its bills, well, you got to pay your bills. That's something where only very occasionally would anyone ask to pull that. But there are sometimes major items on that, and you're right. The consent agenda probably should be, again, about 20% smaller than it really is. And people should take the time to look at those items and consider them. That's another change which you can really only make if you're on council. And it's something that I'd like to see happen. I know personally, I have asked council members to pull items from the consent agenda, and sometimes they have. But also sometimes they don't want to rock the boat, and they haven't, and I think that's a shame.
Very good. Brett Glass, City Council Ward 2 candidate for the City of Laramie, and we thank you for joining us here on the Talk Shop. Last comment, I always want to give you the last word.
Yes, well, thank you. Again, I'm essentially just an involved citizen. I'm not I don't consider myself to be a genius. I don't consider myself to be, anything special. And I'm not in there for my own interests. In fact, there are some things where I might even vote against my own specific interests. But what I want to see is Laramie run right. I see too many things being stymied by the way our government currently works. Again, I've talked in particular about some of the red tape that's prevented people from doing good things that would be good for the community, from realizing their own personal dreams and ambitions. And I'm just hoping I'll only be one of 9 if I get elected. But I'm hoping to make a positive difference, and so I hope that people will vote for me in the primary and in the general election.
Brett Glass, City Council Ward 2 candidate. How does someone get a hold of you to ask you additional questions or perhaps make suggestions and so forth?
The easiest way to do it is to go, and this is easy to remember, go to voteglass.com. And there you will find my email address, you'll find my social media contacts, you will find my phone number. And I will respond if you call or email me. So please do. I want to know more about what the public thinks and what I should be considering during the campaign, and hopefully if I'm elected to council.
I'm Eric Henderson, and this is the Talk Shop Candidate Awareness Tour 2024. The opinions and viewpoints, perspectives expressed here are those of Brett Glass and myself, Eric Henderson, exclusively, without any advertiser or underwriter support, input whatsoever. And we appreciate your comments directed to email radioworks@mail.com. That's radioworks@mail.com. Phone number 307-460-3087. That's 460-3087 for the Talk Shop. Here I am, and here we go.